I have always liked making pictures, but my job was to be an English professor. So I mostly did literature, but I always kind of hankered to do pictures. So when I found this little story that Jane Austen, this famous author Gail has told you about, wrote when she was young, and I read this story, I thought, I'd like to make that story into a story for kids. I don't know if she thought of kids as her audience in the first place, but that was my idea. And I thought, this is a story about a girl who goes out and has her day's adventures and comes home, and her mother still loves her even though she's done some pretty wild and disreputable things. So I decided I was going to change all the characters in the story into small animals. And especially I wanted my heroine, whose name is Cassandra, to be a mouse. If there's time afterwards, I want to tell you about my pet mouse, Douglas, who used to live in my shirt. But for the moment, I am talking about Jane Austen's Beautiful Cassandra. And this was my first picture. I've got them in order over there, Gail, if you'd like to take the stack with you. And she imitated the style of the day, which was to make a very, very flattering dedication. And she dedicates it to her sister, who is also called Cassandra. And she says, "The Beautiful Cassandra, a novel in 12 chapters, dedicated by permission to Miss Austen." Dedication. "Madam, you are a phoenix," etc. All sorts of praise that she comes out with for her sister. And she signs it off, "Your most obedient, humble servant, the author." She was very proud of being an author. Well, now we begin the story itself. Cassandra was the daughter, and the only daughter, of a celebrated milliner in Bond Street. Now, do you know what a milliner does? She makes hats and bonnets. So there is her mother, who is a mouse. Next one there. Sorry, Gail, it's going to keep you going a while.
I'm good at it.
So her mother, being a milliner, she makes bonnets for human people, so they're pretty big in comparison with her. But you see, there are the scissors, and she's sitting on a reel of thread. And she's sewing with a great big needle. Her father was of noble birth, being the near relation of the Duchess of Blank's butler. Now, a butler is a servant, so I imagined her father slept in the butler's slipper. That was how come he came to be the near relation of a butler. Now, when Cassandra... Oh, you're bringing a...
My pointer.
Pointer, okay. When Cassandra had attained her 16th year, she was lovely and amiable, and chancing to fall in love with an elegant bonnet her mother had just completed, bespoke by the Countess of Dash. We don't mind about those sheets, Gail.
Okay.
We won't worry about them. She chanced to fall in love with an elegant bonnet her mother had just completed, bespoke by the Countess of Dash. So my idea was, there is a little Cupid shooting an arrow to show she's fallen in love with this bonnet. And the bonnet was bespoken by a countess, but this is the magical moment in which Cassandra is transformed into the size that will fit the bonnet. She placed it on her gentle head and walked from her mother's shop to make her fortune. Good idea to have two at a time. The first person she met was the Viscount of Squiggle, a young man no less celebrated for his accomplishments and virtue than for his elegance and beauty.
Can you see him?
Do you know what he is? What kind of animal?
Crocodile.
Quite right, he's a lizard. And the reason I chose lizard was that there's a phrase about a lounge lizard. Somebody who just spends a lot of time just being elegant and lazy. So I thought that he would be a lounge lizard. But in a Jane Austen novel, the first man that the heroine meets is likely to be the one she falls in love with, but not with Cassandra, who is one tough cookie. She curtsied and walked on. So instead of falling into his arms and saying, "I love you, do you love me too?" She is just going to leave him a little disappointed over there. "Oh, I just took off my hat and everything." "Oh, what'd she do?" "She just walked off on me." You see, the words say so much, but I've got to make the pictures fill in the gaps between the words. She then proceeded to a pastry cook's, where she devoured 6 ice creams. 1, 2, 3, and 3 empties. She devoured 6 ices, refused to pay for them, knocked down the pastry cook, and walked away. We have to have that one.
It's one of my favorites.
And this bill here says bill of fare, and it talks about what each of those ices would cost. And here are the strawberries on the floor, and she is running out the door. Do you know what animal I made the pastry cook? What? You did! How clever of you! You recognized it was a guinea pig. I never thought anybody would. But when I was doing my research for the stories, I don't possess a guinea pig. So I went to a pet shop and I said, "May I handle your guinea pig?" And they said, "Go ahead." So I picked up the guinea pig and turned it upside down because I didn't know what the bottom of a guinea pig's foot looked like. So that is done from the life. Refused to pay for them, knocked down the pastry cook, and walked away. She next ascended a hackney coach. A hackney coach is a coach that you can hire like a taxi. But of course, in those days, there were no motor cars. And if you notice, do you notice what kind of an animal the coachman is? Oh, you were looking at the horse. What about the coachman? Oh, a frog, and as you say, the horse is a turtle. Do you think a turtle would mind very much if a coachman whips him on the back? No. So that big one is the one behind here. Shall we just, oh, you brought it forward? Oh, you got the big one. She next ascended a hackney coach and ordered it to Hampstead. Hampstead is high up on a hill, and the little, so she's leaving a church behind there, and you see she's already in the fields because it was quite the country in those days. Being returned to the same spot. Oh, we have next one, please. I decided to have these two on the same page. Yes. Being returned to the same spot of the same street she had set out from, the coachman, so we had him, we've got to do this, I skipped that text, excuse me. Ordered him to Hampstead, where she was no sooner arrived than she ordered the coachman to turn round and drive her back again.
So there it's going forward, and here it's coming back.
And when it's in the book, I asked the designer to put the print in the black areas so that it stands out. And often illustrators, was a famous illustrator called Arthur Rackham who did a lot of work in silhouettes. So that's what I decided to do for those pictures. Okay, now, being returned to the same spot of the same street she had set out from, the coachman demanded his pay. Now, do you notice the bonnet has taken a bit of a beating?
Oh, yes.
So here so by now, the bonnet is in a pretty rough shape. The coachman demanded, she searched her pockets over and over again, but every search was unsuccessful. No money could she find. The man grew peremptory. She placed her bonnet on his head and ran away. So she's ready to sacrifice the bonnet by now. She's got a lot of mileage out of it, so to speak. And do you think he looks as though he's pleased with his pay? No. Here he is wearing a lady's bonnet. Through many a street she then proceeded and met in none the least adventure till, on turning a corner of Bloomsbury Square, she met Maria. What's Maria, do you think? What is she? She's a squirrel, quite. Now, we don't know. They must have quarreled or something because we hear Cassandra started and Maria seemed surprised. They trembled, blushed, turned pale, and passed each other in a mutual silence. Sorry, Gail, I ran ahead of you there.
That's okay.
We've got 2 Mariahs. Okay, then we've got the widow. Cassandra was next accosted by her friend the widow, who, squeezing her little head through her less window, asked her how she did. Cassandra curtsied and went on. And I thought to explain why Cassandra rushes away, I would make the widow into a cat. So a mouse would not like to hang around too long when there's a cat, right? Sorry to work you so hard, Gail.
No, it's good.
A quarter of a mile brought her to her paternal roof. Paternal, does anybody know what paternal means? Belonging to the father. So she's got to find her dad there. Brought her to her paternal roof in Bond Street, from which she had now been absent nearly 7 hours. So there, if you see in the window, those are the 2 bonnets you saw in the first picture. Do you think her father looks like an energetic man? No, he cares about fashion, but he doesn't seem to care much about work. She entered and was pressed to her mother's bosom by that worthy woman. So she's still sitting on the reel of thread, you see, but she is so happy to see Cassandra, she throws her hands up in the air. What do you think this little thing is there? Anybody know? Yes? Yes. Do you know what it is? It's called a thimble. Well, she's been pretty wicked on this trip, hasn't she? In some stories, she would get home and her parents would say, "You naughty girl, you've been away," all those things. But she was pressed to her mother's bosom. Cassandra smiled and whispered to herself, "This has been a day well spent." She's had this huge binge. She's eaten 6 ice creams. She's refused to pay for her hackney coach ride. She's walloped the pastry cook. She's left her busted up bonnet on the coachman's head. She's gone home. She's cut Mariah. She has done all kinds of socially inappropriate things. Even going through the streets without a hat on for a lady in those days was pretty outrageous. So she has done all these outrageous things. Does she get punished? No. Her mum loves her anyway and is serving her with some nice drink. And Cassandra, you see, is now back to her usual size, just a mouse size, because she can make a bed out of a bonnet.
That's great.